Marcus Webb was not a man who talked about himself. If you passed him on the street in Columbus, Ohio, you would see a quiet man in his early 50s, maybe a little weathered around the eyes, wearing a plain gray hoodie and worn-out sneakers. No medals on his chest. No patches on his jacket. Nothing that would tell you a single thing about who he really was. He had a dog named Duke, a 3-year-old German shepherd with a red service vest. Duke went everywhere with Marcus. The grocery store, the VA clinic, the park on Tuesday mornings when Marcus could not sleep, which was most Tuesday mornings. Duke was not a pet. Duke was a lifeline. Marcus had been medically retired from the United States Army 4 years prior after 22 years of service. Service that had taken him from Fort Bragg to Kandahar to places that do not appear on any map you will ever see. He had survived things that most human beings cannot even imagine. And he had paid for it. Quietly. Every single day he paid for it. The trip to Phoenix was not optional. His younger brother Daniel had suffered a cardiac event. Serious enough that Marcus had gotten the call at 2 a.m. and booked the first available flight without hesitation. He packed in 8 minutes. He did not eat breakfast. He did not sleep. He just moved the way soldiers move because there was a mission and you complete the mission. He arrived at Columbus Airport at 5:47 a.m. with Duke at his side and his boarding documents showing Duke's certification as a psychiatric service animal. Paperwork approved and stamped by 3 separate VA counselors. Everything was in order. Everything was fine. Until Gate C12. Her name was Brenda Calloway, 53 years old, an HOA board president from Scottsdale, Arizona, flying home after visiting her sister. A woman who had opinions, strong ones, and was not afraid to share them, loudly at any altitude. Brenda had been watching Marcus since the moment he sat down across the aisle. She watched Duke settle under the seat. She watched Marcus close his eyes and rest his head against the window. She watched him pull his hoodie tight and go completely, unnervingly still. And something about that stillness offended her deeply. She leaned over to the passenger beside her. A young man named Trevor, 26, a dental student who was absolutely not prepared for what was about to happen. And she whispered, loudly enough for 3 rows to hear, "That dog doesn't look like a real service animal to me. And that man doesn't look like he needs it. Look at him. He's perfectly fine. These people lie about this stuff all the time just to bring their pets on the plane." Trevor said nothing. He put his earbuds in. Brenda pressed the call button. When the flight attendant arrived, a young woman named Sophia, 28, in just her 2nd year on the job, Brenda gestured toward Marcus and said, in the kind of voice that expects immediate results, "I want to know if that dog has proper documentation, because I am allergic and I have rights. And if that man is lying about needing a service animal, I want him removed from this flight." Sophia calmly informed Brenda that all documentation had been verified at check-in and that everything was in compliance with federal aviation regulations. Brenda's face went red. "I want to speak to the head flight attendant." Sophia nodded and went to get her supervisor. And that is when Marcus Webb, eyes still closed, still as stone, quietly said, to no one in particular, in a voice barely above a whisper, "It's okay, Duke. She's just scared." Brenda heard it, and she exploded. She stood up, mid-flight, in front of 146 witnesses, pointed her finger at Marcus and said, "You are faking. I don't know what your game is, but I have dealt with people like you my entire life. You want sympathy. You want special treatment. And the rest of us have to sit here and accommodate you and your animal while you sit there perfectly healthy and fine." Marcus did not open his eyes. Duke's ears went flat. Brenda's voice climbed. "Look at me when I am talking to you." Still nothing. The head flight attendant, a 20-year veteran named Carolyn, arrived and placed herself between Brenda and Marcus. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat. I will not return to my seat until somebody tells me why that man gets special treatment." Carolyn had already checked. There was no dog allergy on Brenda's passenger record. No medical documentation had been submitted at check-in. She had not mentioned an allergy once during boarding. But Carolyn stayed calm. "All service animal documentation has been verified. This passenger is within his rights." Brenda turned to face the whole cabin. Does anyone here think this is okay? Does anyone think this is ridiculous? Silence. And then a voice from row 19 said, quietly but clearly, "Lady, leave him alone." It was a woman named Patricia, 61 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Cincinnati. She was not performing. She simply said what she saw. Brenda turned. "Excuse me?" I said, "Leave him alone. He is not bothering you. He is bothering me. His dog is bothering me. And I have every right." "You have a right to sit down," Patricia said. "That is about it right now." Brenda turned back to Marcus and leaned in closer than was appropriate, and said in a voice dripping with contempt, "What are you even traumatized by? What could you possibly have been through that you need a dog to hold your hand on an airplane? You are a grown man. Act like one." Duke stood up. Not aggressively. No growl. No bared teeth. He simply rose to his feet and placed his body between Brenda and Marcus, the way he had been trained to do, the way he had done 100 times before, in waiting rooms, in parking lots, in the dark of 3 a.m. when Marcus woke up on the floor not knowing where he was or what year it was or whether the men he had lost were still alive somewhere in his memory or gone forever into the ground. Duke knew one thing. His person was in distress, and his job was to stand between his person and whatever was causing it. Brenda recoiled. "That animal just threatened me." "He didn't move toward you," said a man in row 21. "He stood up." Carolyn stepped fully between them. "Ma'am, I am going to ask you one final time. I want the pilot. I want to speak to the pilot." And then Marcus Webb opened his eyes. He did not look angry. He did not look hurt. He looked at Brenda Calloway with the kind of eyes that have seen things no human being should ever have to see. Eyes that had looked at loss and horror and kept going anyway, and he said, calm as still water, "Ma'am, I am not going to argue with you, but I am going to ask you to please not do that again. Not for my sake." He looked down at Duke. For his. The cabin went absolutely silent. And then, from seat 34A at the very back of the plane, where a man had been sitting in complete silence the entire flight, came a quiet voice. "Carolyn, could I speak to you for a moment? Privately. It is important." The man in 34A was already on his feet. Tall, silver-haired, plain blue jacket, and a look that Carolyn would later describe as the kind of look that makes you understand the word authority for the very first time in your life. She walked back to him. He leaned in and said 6 words. 6 words that made her hand fly to her mouth. What Carolyn did not know, what almost no one on that plane knew, was who Marcus Webb actually was. He was not just a veteran. He was not simply a retired soldier. He was Command Sergeant Major Marcus Webb, United States Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, with 22 years of service across 11 combat deployments spanning Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and 3 other locations that remain classified in Department of Defense records to this day. He had received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest combat decoration in the United States military, for a mission in 2009 that saved the lives of 14 American soldiers trapped behind enemy lines in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. A mission during which he was shot twice and kept moving. He had received the Silver Star twice, the Bronze Star with Valor 4 times, personal commendations signed by 2 sitting presidents. And in a ceremony at the Pentagon in 2019, closed to all press, he had been quietly awarded the nation's highest military honor, with the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and 17 of the soldiers whose lives he had saved sitting in that room. He was, by every official military measure, the most decorated active-era Special Forces commander in the United States Army. And he had PTSD. Because of course he did. Because that is what happens when you see what Marcus Webb saw. When you carry what Marcus Webb carried. When you come home and the war does not stay where you left it. When it follows you into the grocery store, into the parking garage, into the silence of 3 a.m. when your heart is pounding and your hands will not stop shaking and Duke puts his warm heavy head into your lap and breathes with you until the storm finally passes. PTSD does not care how strong you are. It does not care what medals are in the box on your shelf. It comes for the strongest ones too. It comes especially for the ones who never let anyone see them break. Marcus had never spoken publicly about his PTSD because he did not want to be defined by it. He went to his VA appointments. He worked with Duke. He had a counselor named Dr. Rivera he saw every other Thursday. He was managing. He was living. He was doing the work. And on that Tuesday morning at 37,000 feet, he was simply trying to get to his brother's hospital bed. Now, the man in 34A. His name was Brigadier General Raymond Holloway, United States Army, retired. 30 years of service. Marcus Webb's commanding officer for 6 years in the early 2000s. He had written 2 of Marcus's commendation letters. He had watched that man walk into situations that Holloway himself had hesitated at, and walk back out the other side. Holloway had not spoken during the confrontation because that was not his way. He had learned over 3 decades that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most important one. But when Marcus opened his eyes and Brenda still had not sat down, Holloway stood up. The 6 words he said to Carolyn were, "I need you to call the captain." Just 6 words. But the way he said them, steady, quiet, absolute, made Carolyn understand that this was not a request she could defer or redirect. She called the captain. Captain David Nguyen, 44 years old, 17 years with the airline, former Air Force pilot, came out of the cockpit and listened as Holloway introduced himself, showed his retired military ID and told Nguyen, in a voice that did not carry past the 2 of them, who Marcus Webb was, what he had done, what he had earned, what he was carrying right now in seat 22B. Captain Nguyen stood very still for 4 seconds. Then he nodded slowly, the way a person nods when something recalibrates inside them, when the world reshuffles and lands differently than it did a moment before. "Thank you, General," he said, and he walked down the aisle. The entire cabin watched. Nguyen stopped at row 22. He looked at Marcus, and then he did something no one expected. He crouched down. Right there in the aisle, captain's uniform, for stripes on his shoulder, crouched down to eye level with Marcus Webb and said, "Sergeant Major, I want to apologize for the disruption to your flight. On behalf of this crew and this airline, I am deeply grateful for your service. We are honored to have you with us today." He extended his hand. Marcus Webb looked at it for a moment. Then he shook it. Nobody in that cabin moved. And then Patricia, the retired schoolteacher from row 19, started clapping. Slowly at first, then harder, then with everything she had. And then the whole plane was clapping. Not for social media, not performing. They were clapping because something true had just happened in front of them. Something real. And people know, even when they do not have words for it, when they have witnessed something they will carry for the rest of their lives. Brenda Calloway sat down. She did not say another word for the rest of the flight. Flight 408 landed at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport at 11:22 a.m. Marcus Webb walked off that plane the same way he walked on it. Quietly. Duke beside him, red vest, head up. He did not stop for photos. He did not give interviews. He went straight to Banner University Medical Center, where his brother Daniel was recovering from emergency heart surgery, and he sat by that hospital bed and held his brother's hand for 4 hours without saying much at all. The story got out anyway. Sophia told a friend that night. That friend posted it. By the next morning, it was everywhere. By the end of the week, the clips had been seen on 6 continents. Marcus gave exactly 1 comment. A single typed statement released through a veterans organization he quietly supported. It said, "I don't share what I've been through because I'm not looking for recognition. I share Duke with the world every day because he helps me get through it. If this story does anything useful, I hope it reminds people that invisible wounds are still wounds, and that the people carrying them deserve patience, not performance." Brenda Calloway issued a public apology 4 days later. A real one, specific, accountable, no qualifications. She said she had been wrong. She said not knowing was not an excuse for how she behaved. She also donated $5,000 to a veterans PTSD support organization. Marcus's brother Daniel made a full recovery. The 2 brothers spent 11 days together at that hospital eating bad food, watching old baseball games, arguing about nothing important in the best possible way. Marcus told a friend afterward it was the best 2 weeks he had experienced in years. And Brigadier General Raymond Holloway, when asked about that flight by a military publication, said simply, "Marcus Webb is the finest soldier I ever served with." It was an honor to be on that flight.